I've been reading up a bit about you, Bernard, on the web.
On the web.
And
yes, my son does that for me.
Yeah, my first question is, you're an obsessive. From what I feel about looking at your work, you're obsessive about portraiture especially. And yes. What drove and what was the instigation for that obsessiveness?
Very early days were at junior school with a pinhole camera, which after we'd finished with at school I took home. And I began taking portraits with a chair as a tripod, and my friends at school, and I would sit or stand and I would do sort of 20-minute exposure on a pinhole camera. So I suppose I was photographing individual people, but I soon realised, I don't know why, as a child, as a young man, they take no notice of you at all. They think, well, perhaps he doesn't know what he's doing, perhaps there's no film in the camera, and they completely ignore you. And they carry on talking and doing whatever they're doing. So the men talking and the women talking on the streets. And then eventually, I'm moving right forward to the 90s when I'd been in newspapers now for probably 30 years. And eventually I'd progressed into what my interests were in the arts. And I was photographing portraiture, really. People in the film industry, people like Eric Morecambe, people like Norman Wisdom, he was great, Dudley Moore. It all ended up when I was eventually freelancing for The Guardian. And that was the Saturday morning, in those days, the Saturday morning arts page. And the beauty of The Guardian, and still today, is that they don't crop your photographs. The newspapers are famous for chopping your photographs up, and it's dreadful when you photograph. You take so much trouble taking a photograph and it gets chopped up.
Yes, I understand where you're coming from there. It still happens.
Drives you mad.
Yeah.
But The Guardian doesn't. You give them an image and they leave it alone.
When you were photographing in Morriston, was it a random thing you were doing, or did you have ideas in your head about exactly what you wanted to photograph?
They are not portraits as portraits.
No.
They are randomly walking down the road and seeing something in front of you, seeing three men talking.
Yes.
And you look at them now and you see they're wearing macks and hats and caps.
Yeah.
And the shoes are shiny. Everything about them is the 60s.
Yes. And so you mentioned the shoes. That's quite interesting because detail is obviously important to you then within the context of a photograph. That's and right. Have you carried that throughout your career?
One shouldn't name names, but David Hearn was photographing R.S. Thomas. And it really upset me when he cut him off at the knees. The great David Hearn, I mean, to me, that is sacrilege, to cut someone off at the knees when the shoes or non-shoes or whatever tell a lot about the person. So a portrait should be either full length,
right,
or perhaps just in the head or the shoulders.
Yeah. Interesting. There's a specific difference actually between you photographing artists and photographing writers.
Yes.
There's a distinct difference in approach, I think, and especially artists' rooms become very important. There's one you have of David Tress where he's sitting on the floor. Why was he sitting on the floor? Or did you actually place him there?
No, he just sat slumped in a corner, and he'd been working. I very rarely photograph artists actually doing it. I'm more interested really in the room and their relationship to the room. It's not so easy to photograph a writer, I don't think. You can have the room, and sometimes the room will tell you a lot about them. There's a lot of mantelpieces in my work. There's a lot of doors in my work. If there's a door, it's always open.
It's interesting because access is always a difficult thing, and getting increasingly difficult as a photographer. You find that there are always closed doors, as it happens, to photographers. How much time did you have with these people?
I think working on a newspaper it becomes obvious to you very quickly that time wasters don't get much luck.
Mm-hmm.
You must never waste a busy man's time.
Mm-hmm.
So speed is of the essence.
Mm-hmm.
And you must have what you're going to do in your mind almost before you've done the photograph.
Mm-hmm.
Jane Bown, the great
Yes.
observer photographer,
Yes.
she worked in the same way. So it's speed, I suppose, and that stays with you. I had a nickname in newspapers. They used to call me 5.6. And this is rather silly because I always take photographs at 5.6.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. It's an in-between aperture, which will give you the depth of field.
Mm.
And if you are hanging an exhibition of photographs of 100 people, they will all have the same depth of field.
Mm-hmm. So are they, maybe a contentious question, I don't know, but I'll ask it anyway. Is it a picture of the art world, or is it a portrait of a human being?
Well, artists are human beings, and they're all individual.
It's the human connection that really intrigues me, you see.
Yes.
Because that human connection is so important, because without that human connection and without that conversation between you and the sitter, they become just photographs. But yours are more than just photographs. That's what I'm trying to get
and
at.
It's more than just a room where they worked.
Yeah.
It's more than just a room where they cooked. It's more than it's the ethos of the person.
Yeah.
It's more about them, really, isn't it?
Yes. You also, in that little film made by students from Southampton, you say, I think, the more you drink, the better the photographs get.
Yeah.
How much truth is in that?
Well, unfortunately, I always called it occupational hazard of being a journalist. And it is a fact that journalists use drink to ply people with drink to make them talk. And it does work. So we had an allowance on newspapers of money to buy people beer and drink. And when we overspent, the accountants would come down from upstairs and say, "What's all these bills for drink?" And I said, "Well, how did you see the story?"
You talk also in your film about your first big camera, really, the Rolly camera,
Right, yeah.
Rolleiflex. What is life like in a 2.25-inch square format?
Back to front, upside down. You get used to it.
Yeah.
The joy of the optics of the Rolly.
Mm.
Every hair on someone's head is so pin sharp. I'm a bit of an old-fashioned person in that I just like quality. I see that in the postmodernist era you can have moving images. Well, I've done that. I've done moving images out of focus, so you get this skaters, out of focus, and people in an alleyway who are running out of focus, and so they become like Giacometti figures. Yeah, I've done all that. But, oh boy, when I first started photographing with the Rolly, and it would be the same with the Hasselblad, I suppose, but I can't afford a Hasselblad. But the Rolly, the optics is so beautiful. And of course, we started in newspapers, and in the 60s, we were still using glass plates. Would you believe that? I can't believe that. I've gone from glass plates to digital. Wow. In one lifetime. It's amazing. It is really.
Do you enjoy the digital?
No. I suppose I'm becoming... You can tell a digital photographer because he takes the picture and immediately looks at it. We never had the joy of that. We knew our picture was right when we took it. Mm-hmm. We did. We knew. Yeah. We knew the picture was right.
So there were no wasted frames.
Of course, there's wasted frames, but this business of interrupting the flow of taking the photograph to look at the back seems foreign to me. And I'm looking at people, watching people taking photographs, and they go click and then reverse it round and look at the back. I'm thinking, what's all that about? It's like a young photographer said to me one day, I've got a motor drive on my camera now that does 13 frames a second. "It helps when we're doing football." I said, "Does it?" I said, "Well, what happens if you only got one frame? How do you get the goal with one frame, you see? It's a matter of timing and watching the man who's going to strike the ball and going to strike the photograph at the precise moment." I said, "You could actually miss that on a selected 13-frame sequence. Don't necessarily. You could be between the shot within the 13 frames a second."
Yeah.
And this young lad looked at me, because I was in charge of training at one point of young photographers on a newspaper, and just looked at me like I was a bit old-fashioned, you know. You know, he's not, that can't be right, but it is. It's true. It's the frame that matters.
When you were photographing artists, how much work did you do prior to meeting them? And how much did you know about their work? I think you probably you love art.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the time they're quite well known. A lot of the time they're not, actually. And I find that more difficult with writers than artists. Because, I mean, I must admit that I photographed writers and never read any of their books.
It's really fascinating. You've in the book there's a picture of Mererid Hopwood, and Mererid Hopwood, I know from experience, dislikes having a photograph taken. She is not comfortable when there's a camera.
She's a lovely lady.
But she's a lovely lady and a very talented lady, very talented writer. How did you? I mean, it'd be really interesting to know how you approached her, because you must have come. She must have said to you, "I don't like how my photograph."
It was quite difficult to decide where to start and where to actually do the photograph. So I arrive at 10 or 11 o'clock in time for coffee. What shall we do? We'll have a cup of coffee. Would you like a cup of coffee? Yes, please. And we sit and we talk and have a cup of coffee. And I'm not just sitting and talking. I'm looking around, and I notice a cello. Mererid plays the cello. I'm not sure whether it was the picture of her chair, the bardic chair, or the cello, or whether she sat on the bardic chair and had the cello between her legs and was just hanging on to it like this, not playing it.
As a comfort.
Yeah. And then we went into the office, into where she writes, and took some pictures in there. And I think that's the one that's in the book.
Yes, it is, yes.
I'm sorry now I didn't use the cello. It was a bit of a difficult one, that.
Another time, maybe.
Another time, yes. I like the cello.
Yes, that's a really good, really nice, because she would have felt something to hang on to is always a big thing when you're...
Menna Elfyn
yes.
was more difficult than Mererid.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, I photographed Menna.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think there was somehow, it took a long time before we really connected.
Yes. Was that, what sort of tricks of the trade do you use to connect other than just general chit-chat? I mean, it's clicking, with a person before clicking the shutter and all that sort of stuff, but what are your tricks?
You know in your mind when you've got the photograph. That could take 3 frames, 1 frame.
Yeah.
Or it could take hundreds of frames.
Yes, yes.
You could waste a whole roll of film if you were doing film and still not be happy with what you got.
Yes.
But suddenly you know that moment when, it's like Cartier-Bresson would have said. And a funny story is at Swansea Met, during a critic session with the Dean of School, I brought up the name of Cartier-Bresson, and she said, "We don't mention his name here. He's dead." I could not believe it.
I was gobsmacked, actually.
This is postmodernism for you.
Yes.
But there's no respect for history or what's been in the past. I am very upset that we have in the past ignored our artists and writers as far as capturing who they were, what they looked like.
Indeed, I agree with you.
And this is what has motivated me.
If I come back to your roots and where you come from, you come from this valley,
and
and
come from these mountains.
you come from these mountains, but you decided to go to School of Art in Reading, which was a pretty radical thing to do, I would imagine.
Well, it was difficult at the time. No one was taking on trainees, and that's why I ended up going. What else could I do? I had got to go to college, so there were very few colleges at the time. There were no colleges doing a degree. The first college to do a degree was Newport.
And you were lucky enough, as you mentioned earlier, you were lucky enough to get jobs working with, organisations outside college in order to.
Well, in the second year, I was thrown out of college for lack of attendance. And Swansea City Council, who had a rather nice grant off them, because my parents didn't have enough money to send me to college, but I had a grant off Swansea City Council, immediately withdrew the grant, and I got thrown out. And I eventually got back in anyway. But
why the non-attendance then, Bernard? I'm intrigued.
Because there were more important things to do. Projects like the thalidomide children, like the spastic children.
The thalidomide one must have been a real. You were a young man, a real eye opener.
These were toddlers.
Right. Okay.
Toddlers with no arms and stumps of fingers on the ends of their shoulders.
Right.
And you've seen them.
Yes. Did you keep any connection with those people? Because that's an intriguing thing.
No, I mean they'd be younger than me, but they'd be getting on now if they survived.
Yeah.
And the things that were happening in the treatment of cerebral palsy until 1962, I think it was, Enoch Powell changed the Mental Health Act. There was a new bill in Parliament. I think it was 62. I could be wrong, could be later. He made it illegal to lock someone up because they had cerebral palsy. Until that point, they were sectioned.
Good gracious.
And I went to, for instance, one of the best days I ever had taking photographs, I think, was at Leavesden Psychiatric Hospital. It was Carnival Day. They were having a fete, and they had a carnival floats, and they had Down syndrome people. That's what it was. Down syndrome was also sectionable.
Difficult to believe.
And they had this photograph, which is on my website, I think, but not in the. Well, there's no pictures of ironic humour in my book. That's what I specialised in newspapers. Really, it was ironic humour. And they put in the people on the back of a lorry, and they dressed them as a pack of cards. There are 5 cards standing there waiting to go on the lorry. Jack of clubs, and centre in the group was the Joker. Now, if you know Down syndrome people, they laugh.
Yes, they do.
And they're all laughing and looking at the camera. And there's the Joker in the back. And when you look at the photograph, you laugh too. And then you realise this is not funny.
Indeed, yeah. Sorry to cut across you. But, therefore, are you a photojournalist or are you a portrait photographer?
Both, I suppose.
Okay.
I mean, I should do more photojournalism, really, I suppose. I have been a bit obsessive with the portraiture.
Oh, for good reason. I wouldn't
I found
admonish you for that.
The thing about newspapers is I was given the opportunity, particularly with the second boss I had in Thomson Newspapers. What would be the most enviable thing you could ever have as a photojournalist? And this man gave it to me. He gave me total freedom of what I took, where I went.
Wow.
I could say, I want to go to Russia, and to Russia I would go. I thought, here's a man who really, none of the papers I worked for really got involved in sending you to a war. So I wasn't a film Jones Griffiths. The nearest I got to a war, I suppose, is Belfast. My good friend, my boss, who's still a good friend, said, whenever there's any trouble in this country, Bernard would be the man to go. So it's a wonder I didn't get in trouble. I never did get hurt or anything. So I covered the anti-Vietnam demonstrations. I covered the last match of the Springbok tour of rugby at Twickenham, which made some cracking photographs. Banned the bomb when they launched the first submarine at Polaris submarine at Birkenhead, Camelades. I was there. The Liverpool police were wielding batons on horseback.
Gosh.
The batons are this long with a leather strap, and they spun them like this, and they're in an echelon, like a point, like an arrow, coming towards you, and they're coming into the crowd of women, children, and they're coming at speed, and they're not going to stop, and that's frightening. And they're banging these things, the riot shields as well. So Bernard always got sent when there was trouble, but I don't know why that was.
Did you cover the miners' strike at all?
No, I was not in Wales.
Of all your photographs, one of your photographs of artists, the one I really love is the one you did of Cuffin Williams.
Yeah.
I think the one of Cuffin Williams in his studio, leaning against his easel.
With no painting.
With no painting is just absolutely a cracker.
That is deliberate. Deliberate. He didn't have a painting on the easel, but I could easily have put a painting on the easel. Because obviously he was working on several paintings all at the same time. He's a fast worker. He would probably do a painting in a day, maybe, or maybe leave it till the next day and add something. His great friend was Ivor Roberts, Jones sculptor, who I photographed. And he was Cuffin's best friend. And he'd come to see Cuffin, and there'd be a painting on the easel. And Ivor would say, "That's rubbish, Cuffin, what are you doing?" And he'd then go through work, which was stacked in the studio. "This is what you should be doing," having found one in a stack. And another funny story about Cuffin was he really wanted to do R.S. Thomas, and R.S. wouldn't have his portrait painted anyway. R.S. Thomas's second wife, his first wife had died, his second wife, an American lady, commissioned Cuffin to paint R.S. He had 3 drawings which he put on the floor, sort of A4 size, a bit bigger than A4, and there was just the head. 2 had a colour wash behind the pencil. 1 was just the pencil. I said, "That's the one, Cuffin. Thank you." I said, "But haven't you done an oil?" "Oh, yes," he said. "It's in the studio, on the easel." So I went up. I said, "Can I look at it?" So I went and looked at it. And going through my mind was, that's dreadful. It really is. If you could imagine R.S. Thomas's feathery hair, white, puff of wind would blow it away, and he's using a palette knife, and it's grey, battleship grey. I said, "Has his wife seen this?" "Yes," he said. I said, "What did she think? What did she say?" "Oh, she couldn't stop laughing." He was hurt. But it's funny, isn't it?
Yeah, it is funny. You were one of the only photographers, and I think you mentioned earlier 2 who photographed Kerry Richards. What was he like as a subject?
A great big giant to me, a giant of a man. Was very humble, very nice, very pleasant. I was such a fan of his. If you went round the Glenvivian in the 50s and the 60s, it was boring. It was full of landscapes and portraits in gilded frames.
Yes.
And in one room, there was Kerry Richards.
Yes.
Wow. It just knocked me sideways, and I thought, this man, and there I am. He was the first person I went to see.
Right.
The first person. If I wanted to see anybody in the world, Kerry Richards. My eldest son is called Kerry.
But this art thing, it's really part of your DNA then.
Art is very much part of my DNA, yes. I blame my father for that. It's not my father, because my father was very clever. He was a plumber. He didn't have a lot of money, but all his 3 children did very well.
So your archive is now...
The early work, that's all at the National Library in Aberystwyth. The Friends of Dillon, which I did at college, and other work I did at college, like the Spastics and the thalidomide people, that's at National Library. When I went into newspapers and I started getting this ironic humour business, that's all at the National Library. The newspaper I worked in, Thomson Newspapers, went into liquidation, closed down before it went into liquidation. They sold it all off, and Thomson's sold the Times, sold the Sunday Times. They moved out of newspapers. They kept the holidays, kept Britannia Airways, but the newspapers were finished.
Did they keep your negs then, Bernard?
They destroyed everything. The library was superb. Everything was filed negatives-wise and annotated, so you knew everything. All my photographs of all the stars and famous people that I photographed. Gone.
You're working digitally now, and
only because these people want things now.
Yes.
And they want them now.
Oh, they want them yesterday, yes.
Yesterday, yes. Yeah. Preferably yesterday.
Did you enjoy that process of manipulating photographs on a screen? It's must be vastly different to what you were used to.
Well, to me, digital photography is redundant. I mean, it's not photography, is it? It's computer IT, isn't it?
It's zeros and ones.
I mean, what I love is these people who have a photograph and then they start changing the colour of the sky. And Gilbert Adams showed me that a glass plate, when you have a portrait of someone famous, like the Queen or someone, then we want to get rid of the bags, they'd use a 3B pencil on the emulsion side of the glass plate.
Right, okay, to get rid.
And then photography, like art, is evolving. Everybody and his mother now has a phone with a camera in it, and the cameras are coming better and better and better and better. They're as good as I can get almost on a normal camera. Well, not perhaps as good as the Rolly, but,
Yes.
It's superb, isn't it?
Yes. You've gone back, you went back to do an MA, which is quite brave, I think.
I was frustrated. That's the reason I did it.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
In what way?
I thought I was getting in a rut. I thought I was getting stale. And I thought I need somebody to wake me up. And this business of only taking photographs of 5.6, I mean, come on, that can't be right, can it? I mean,
if it works for you.
It's silly. But when I went there, you see, and I had my interview to do the MA, the chap in charge of the MA said, well, the first thing he said, well, you didn't bring a portfolio with you. I said, well, you didn't say anything in your letter about portfolios. Oh, I thought you just wanted to see me, Honestly, I don't know why I didn't take a portfolio. I said, but actually, in the Grand Theatre at the moment, there's 100 photographs up on an exhibition that I've got there in the arts room. And I said, it's 100 portraits from the very early days to the present day. And I said, if you meet me down there, I'll take you through it and explain to you how, I started with this 2.25 square camera, and now I'm using digital cameras and, all that stuff. So I said, Tuesday would be a good day. So I met him there on a Tuesday, and he looked around, we had a chat. I said, So I don't think there's any problem you getting in on the course, he said. But, he said,
that was good of him.
Would you please not take any photographs?
Not take any photographs?
Not take any photographs. Because I don't think we can tell you any more about taking photographs. And really, that wouldn't challenge you. We're doing you a favour, he said, really. Can you do something else? And when you saw the exhibitions they produced, you'd realise there are very few photographs in these exhibitions.
Yes.
I've never seen a postmodernist exhibition.
Yes, I have.
Yes. Well, there are very few photographs, actually, that are photographs in any means to... I mean, he was actually a performance photographer.
Okay.
That's what his... the head of the course.
Okay.
So it meant that actually it took two people to take a photograph, one to perform and one to photograph it. And it was actually the photographer who performed, and someone else, an assistant, would photograph it.
A performance photographer.
Yeah.
That's a new one on me, actually.
No.
I've not heard of that one before, but
So anyway,
it's intriguing.
I decided, right, I thought, okay, I'll do film.
Right.
Which meant me, actually, I had to go an extra day, because we only did 2 or 3 days a week. I had to do an extra day to do editing. I had to learn about editing films.
So, after having done your MA, what are your conclusions about the education system as far as photography goes?
I find it very sad. For instance, I'm going to be controversial now. I don't know whether you should put this on your website. People who, for instance, teach photojournalism. I've never worked for a magazine or a newspaper. I found that difficult. I don't think I should say this because I'm going to upset a lot of people. I offered them to give them a lecture when I was a student there, and they said no.
Obviously, you're not going to stop taking photographs.
Well, I stopped for a good period.
Yeah.
I stopped. My wife says I shouldn't talk about strokes. To tell people who had a stroke as an excuse, really. It is an excuse because you forget things. I'm very, very lucky, aren't I? When I was in the hospital and there were people opposite me in beds, and there was no hope for them at all. If the machines had been switched off, it would probably have been a blessing.
Has it changed your perspective on photography?
What it did was it zapped my confidence.
I mean, there are not many photographers in Wales who have a collection in the Richard Burton, in the National Library, in the National Portrait Gallery in London. I can't think of many.
National Museum now. As well.
National Museum as well. I mean, it's pretty good.
It's getting better.
Has bringing out the book though given you brought back the confidence in you?
I always wanted a book.
Yeah.
It gives you some sort of stability, some sort of foundation, I suppose.
Yeah.
I love books. I mean, look at the shelves.
Yeah. But what's your take on photojournalism
and
today?
The portrait is acceptable as photojournalism in my book because it's telling a story.
Indeed,
and that is what photojournalism is.
Yes.
It's telling a story. It could be a sequence. It could be a one-off. You realise what has happened to photojournalism. It's been dumbed. It's been dumbed down. It's been castrated. It's been castrated initially by the politicians. When they saw what Philip Jones Griffiths did in Vietnam, they realised how dangerous we were. We were dynamite. What we could show, what I can show of a thalidomide child is far more powerful than any gun, and the Americans knew it. Therefore, we weren't allowed into the Falklands. We weren't allowed anywhere now without a minder. You're embedded, is the word, a term. Embedded? No, you're shackled.
Yes.
Would you want to see something rather moving, something perhaps upsetting? If you were advertising Dior or Mercedes or BMW.
Nope.
They do not want it next to their product.
No.
The product advert is a means of life to a newspaper. And it's a brave editor today who says, oh, I'm sorry, you can't have that page. That's one of Bernard's pictures there, and we can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And you see, that's why I suppose I liked ironic humour.
Photography in Wales, Bernard, today.
Yes.
What's it like? What's the scene like?
Well, some of it's very good. There's a young man now who lives in Spain, Jones.
He actually lives in Bologna in Italy.
Italy, is it?
Yes, we've got great friends with him.
He's got a caravanette, exactly the same as David Hearn had.
Yeah.
And I went to see his exhibition at the National Library.
He's a good photographer.
A very good photographer.
Yeah, yes. Special. An interesting question I wanted to ask you, really, was I've more and more, and the more I read about photographers and photography, is that increasingly I feel that every photograph I take is a self-portrait in many respects. Even if I'm doing landscape, it's kind of a weird feeling.
Well, that's nice, yeah, because this is where we're going back into the. I wish I could remember the guy's name. He spends his time doing landscape photographs, which are actually portraits of himself. Self-portraits.
Ah, right, okay.
This is the film Across the Mountain.
Ah, right.
Self-portrait of me.
Yes, a self-portrait of you. Interesting. I'm making this book about Pembrokeshire.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this. I love Pembrokeshire.
Yeah, and it's become a bit autobiographical because I was brought up there. My father came from there and stuff. And there's a picture of me as a boy of, I don't know, must have been just about 2. And it was taken by a guy who ran Studio John, and his name was John Evans, and he photographed everybody in Pembrokeshire, I think. And he was the one that photographed the oil refineries when they were being built, etc. So he got a really good gig. So he made a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I discovered that he was still alive. So I went to his house, and he's 94, and I've done a portrait of him. So in the book will be a portrait of me that he took and a portrait of him, because it's that kind of, that relationship between things in the past and things that are happening to you now, and age and
Where
time. In Fishguard. Yeah. And he was a really interesting man. He was an artist as well, and I went to his house. And it was remarkable.
I spent a long time as a child in Langham.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Langham is an interesting place.
Yes, a little row of houses running down to the water.
Yes.
And there was a ferry, a rowing boat from there across.
Yeah.
It was called Langham Ferry.
Langham Ferry, yeah.
And my aunt lived about the second cottage up.
All right, okay.
And I was sent there because I had a TB. Right. And they sent me down there because of the fresh air. Luckily, when I got it, they invented a drug called streptomycin, which, if you had enough of it, and they used to I was in bed, lying on my stomach, and the nurse would come every day, and she'd go, bush into my bottom.
Streptomycin.
And at one point, they left the needle in, so I couldn't turn over, and she'd just clip the new cartridge on.
I'll zap you again.
Yeah, because my bum was getting like a pincushion. I play darts with it, I'm okay now.
Good.
No, none of that rubbish.
Good.